When something or someone is constantly present in our lives, the human mind begins to drift into familiarity. Familiarity can be comforting, yet it is also the root of blindness. When we see someone every day, when their presence becomes routine, we unconsciously stop noticing the silent gifts they bring. The voice that once brought calm becomes background noise. The presence that once brought warmth becomes assumed. It is only when that energy withdraws that the truth begins to unfold. The truth that what we thought was ordinary was, in fact, the foundation of our peace. Absence becomes the mirror that shows what presence concealed. A man rarely understands what he truly had while he still has it. His mind, driven by ego and comfort, seeks novelty, excitement, distraction. He begins to believe that love will remain, no matter how little attention he gives it. He starts to test the boundaries of her patience, assuming that the emotional shelter she offers will always be there. But when she leaves, when her energy no longer fills his world, the stillness that follows becomes unbearable. In that silence, he begins to hear not the sound of her voice, but the echo of her absence. Every conversation they had, every small act of care, every gentle correction, now returns as a memory carrying weight. What once felt light now feels sacred. Absence reveals value because it removes illusion. In presence, the ego is active, it judges, it compares, it seeks more. But in absence, only truth remains. The man who once overlooked her begins to see how much of his world was built upon her quiet consistency. He begins to notice how her energy made his chaos bearable. The mornings feel heavier, not because she is gone, but because her presence once carried the invisible weight of his emotions. He sees how she added rhythm to his days, how her small routines kept his life balanced without him realizing. There is a kind of awakening that only emptiness can teach. When the presence of someone vanishes, we begin to sense the subtle vibrations they left behind. The way they looked at us when we were unaware, the tone of their laughter, the warmth of their silence. All of this becomes magnified in their absence. What the eyes fail to see, the heart begins to remember. And in that remembrance, the mind is humbled. It realizes that love is not measured by grand gestures, but by quiet constancy. Absence also strips away pride. The same man who once argued to be right now finds himself wishing for her presence, not to win, but simply to feel her nearness again. The arguments lose their meaning. The small ego victories dissolve into dust. He begins to understand that peace was more valuable than being right. That her presence was not something he was entitled to, but something he was blessed to experience. It is through losing her that he begins to see how much he depended on her energy to remain balanced. Every human being carries two kinds of awareness, the awareness of having and the awareness of losing. The first is casual, the second is sacred. When he loses her, his awareness shifts from comfort to reflection. He replays the moments, the times she reached out when he withdrew, the times she smiled when he was cold, the times she stood by him when he was lost in his own storms. Each of these memories now becomes a teaching. He realizes that what he once dismissed as ordinary was, in truth, extraordinary, that the way she listened, the way she saw through his defenses, the way she chose to stay, all of it was love in its highest form. Absence has a strange way of bringing the heart back to humility. It strips away arrogance, leaving behind only the longing for what truly mattered. The man begins to see how his indifference was not strength but blindness. He understands that presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. The things we take for granted eventually become the things we wish we could experience once more. Her absence becomes his greatest teacher, a silent mentor that speaks through the ache in his heart. There is a moment when he reaches for his phone, not to send a message, but to scroll through old conversations. He reads the words she once sent and realizes how often she spoke love through patience, how often she reached out even when he didn't respond. Every message now feels like a sacred text. Every photo a reminder of a time he didn't know he was being loved. He realizes that value is never truly seen through the eyes. It is felt through loss. Absence sharpens the senses of the soul. And as the days pass, the absence deepens into understanding. He begins to see how her energy shaped the environment around him. Even the spaces she once occupied feel different now. The chair she used to sit on, the scent she left behind, the quiet after she left. These are not just physical reminders. They are imprints of a soul that once connected with his. Absence makes him aware of energy in a way presence never could. It teaches him that presence is not merely about being there physically, but about the vibration one brings into another's life. The man begins to understand that her absence is not punishment, but reflection. It shows him who he was when she was around. Distracted, impatient, ungrateful. It also shows him who he is becoming. Reflective, softer, aware. This is how absence reveals value. It transforms the unconscious into consciousness. What was once ignored becomes sacred. What was once taken lightly becomes heavy with meaning. In the stillness of loss, he begins to grow. Not because she returns, but because he finally understands what her presence meant. Her absence has become the teacher that her presence could never be. Presence offered him love, but absence offers him wisdom. It is in that quiet revelation that a man truly awakens to the value of what he has lost, not through possession, but through remembrance. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything we once ignored. When a woman's voice, laughter, and warmth fade from a man's daily life, what remains is not emptiness but echo. The echo of her tone, her words, her energy. These echoes do not come to punish, they come to remind. In the noise of life, emotions can be easily buried beneath distraction, ego, and routine. But when silence arrives, it has a way of amplifying what was once dismissed. In that quiet, every emotion he never faced begins to return louder, clearer, impossible to escape. A man rarely listens when love speaks softly. When she was there, her care spoke in small gestures. The gentle way she asked if he was okay, the patience she offered during his storms, the softness in her eyes when he was too proud to apologize. He thought those moments were ordinary, temporary, replaceable. But when her presence withdraws, silence becomes a mirror, and every word she ever said starts to echo inside his chest. The things he once tuned out become the very sounds that haunt him. Her take care becomes a whisper that follows him before sleep. Her laughter replays in spaces that now feel too large for him alone. Silence reveals emotional truth because there is no distraction to cover it. In noise, the ego finds shelter. It can justify, rationalize, and avoid. But silence leaves the man alone with his conscience. There are no arguments left to win, no excuses left to defend. There is only him and the sound of what is gone. This is when emotional echoes grow louder, not because they were absent before, but because the walls of noise that hid them have fallen. Silence magnifies everything that was left unsaid, every emotion that was left unfelt. In the days following her absence, he begins to notice that silence has texture. It is not flat or still, it moves through his environment. When he wakes up, the quiet of the morning feels different. There used to be her voice, her footsteps, her presence shaping the rhythm of the space. Now the same silence that once felt peaceful feels heavy. It carries the weight of memory. He begins to realize that emotions do not vanish when people leave. They remain suspended in the atmosphere, waiting for acknowledgement. The energy she once poured into him now reverberates within the silence, demanding to be heard. Emotional echoes do not speak in words. They speak through sensations. The sudden ache in the chest when a familiar scent appears, the sting in the throat when a song plays, the emptiness that surfaces when he sees something that once made her smile. These are not coincidences. They are the echoes of moments he did not fully live when he had the chance. Each one arrives like a wave, soft yet persistent, teaching him that silence is not his enemy. It is his teacher, showing him the depth of what he feels and the weight of what he ignored. When a man loses someone who once grounded his emotions, silence becomes both a mirror and a messenger. In that quiet, he begins to hear his own heart more clearly, not the confident, controlled voice of ego, but the fragile, trembling truth beneath it. He begins to remember how she spoke to him with patience when he was distant, how she gave warmth even when he was cold. Those moments replay inside him, but this time he feels them fully. The same silence that once felt unbearable slowly transforms into understanding. It tells him what her words never could, that love was not the noise between them, but the presence behind it. He starts to notice that silence carries layers. The first layer is regret, the recognition that he could have listened more, spoken less, understood deeper. The second layer is gratitude, a quiet appreciation for what was once his reality. The third layer is transformation, a realization that silence is not just a void, but a space where awareness grows. Emotional echoes become the bridge between what was lost and what can still be learned. They remind him that emotional neglect has a cost, that ignoring presence eventually leads to longing. The heart speaks most clearly in silence. When she was there, her emotions spoke softly through gestures and energy. When she is gone, those emotions return as echoes, louder, sharper, undeniable. Every act of care he overlooked becomes a whisper in his mind. Every argument where he chose pride over peace becomes a sound that repeats itself, not to torment but to teach. Silence holds memory in its purest form. It removes the distractions that kept him blind and leaves him face to face with the truth he once refused to feel. There are moments when he tries to fill the silence. Music, conversation, movement, yet nothing feels the same. Even amidst noise, the silence underneath remains. It follows him like a shadow, reminding him that the loudest lessons in life are not spoken by others, but by the absence of what once was. The emotional echoes speak not from her lips, but from his memory, and the more he runs from them, the louder they grow. Silence is patient. It does not chase, it waits. And in its waiting, it teaches him that avoidance is another form of suffering. Every time he remembers her voice, he also remembers how little he truly listened. Every time he recalls her laughter, he realizes how often he chose distraction over presence. Silence shows him that emotions never disappear, they transform. What was once love spoken aloud becomes love remembered. What was once comfort becomes reflection. Emotional echoes, though painful, are sacred. They are the sound of truth finally being heard. As days pass, he begins to understand that silence is not emptiness, but awareness expanding. The echoes inside him are not reminders of loss, but invitations to depth. Through silence, he begins to develop emotional clarity. He sees how she once centered him, how her words softened his anger, how her patience balanced his chaos. All of it comes back, not through conversation, but through resonance. Emotional echoes are louder in silence because silence is honest. It strips away illusion and reveals what the noise of life once buried. In this stillness, he does not hear her voice as before, but he feels its essence. It becomes part of his inner world, guiding, reminding, awakening. The echoes are not meant to bring him sorrow but awareness. They remind him of the power of presence, of the fragility of connection, and of the truth that love, once experienced, never fully disappears. It simply changes its form, transforming from words once spoken into lessons now heard within the silence. Loss has a way of slowing life down. It removes the noise, the distractions, and the illusion of permanence. When a man experiences the loss of a woman who once stood quietly by his side, he doesn't just lose her presence. He loses a part of the reflection he saw in her eyes. In her absence, the outer world may appear unchanged, but the inner world begins to tremble. The laughter of others feels distant, the comfort of routine becomes shallow, and silence starts to stretch longer than it ever has before. It is within this silence that awareness begins to awaken. Loss, though painful, becomes the mirror through which he finally sees himself clearly. When someone we love is present, we often see only fragments of ourselves reflected through their reactions, their affection, their forgiveness. But when that reflection disappears, what remains is the unfiltered truth. Without her gaze, without her patience to balance his energy, he begins to confront the parts of himself he once avoided. The anger that once surfaced in small arguments now reveals its roots: fear, insecurity, ego. The indifference that once felt like control now feels like emptiness. Loss strips away the comforting illusions he built around himself. It leaves him face to face with what he truly is, not what he pretended to be. Awareness does not grow in comfort. It grows through confrontation, the confrontation between what we thought we were and what reality shows us. When he loses her, he begins to see the contrast between who he was with her and who he is without her. Her presence once gave structure to his emotions, direction to his days, and balance to his energy. Now, without that anchor, he feels the weight of his own imbalance. The mirror of loss reflects both his light and his shadows. It shows him how much of his peace depended on her calm, how much of his stability relied on her patience. Loss teaches awareness through absence. Awareness is not about seeing what is external, but understanding what is internal. When he feels the emptiness where she once stood, he begins to understand that what he misses is not only her. It is the version of himself that felt whole in her presence. He starts to notice how much she brought him back to himself without ever saying it directly. Through her calm, he learned stillness. Through her kindness, he learned humility. Through her departure, he now learns awareness. Loss becomes a silent teacher that speaks through reflection rather than words. The mind has a tendency to escape pain. It seeks distraction, company, or activity to avoid feeling the depth of loss. But awareness requires stillness. When he finally stops running from the pain, he begins to see its purpose. Every moment of discomfort becomes a doorway into understanding. The loneliness he feels is not just about missing her. It is about meeting himself without her reflection. For the first time, he faces his thoughts, his habits, and his emotional patterns without the comfort of her presence to soften them. This confrontation, though painful, is purification. It is through this process that awareness deepens. Loss breaks the illusion of control. When she was there, he might have believed he was the steady one, the strong one, the logical one. But now, stripped of her grounding influence, he realizes that she was the quiet force that held everything together. Loss removes the veil and reveals the truth. Strength without emotional awareness is fragility disguised as power. In the mirror of loss, he sees that true strength is not the ability to dominate or detach, but the capacity to feel, to understand, to value. Awareness grows through humility, and humility often arrives after loss. He begins to replay the past, not out of nostalgia, but out of awakening. He remembers moments when she tried to reach him, when her silence spoke more than her words, when her eyes asked for understanding, when her patience slowly began to fade. These memories no longer serve as comfort, they serve as lessons. Each one reveals a truth he once ignored. The mirror of loss shows him not only what she gave, but what he failed to see. Awareness is not just about noticing the good that was lost, it is about recognizing the unconsciousness that allowed the loss to happen. Through loss, the heart develops new sensitivity. What once felt dull becomes alive with feeling. The same man who once took love lightly now feels emotion in its rawest form. The ache in his chest, the heaviness in his breath, the emptiness in his surroundings. These sensations are not punishments, they are awakenings. Awareness enters through the cracks that loss creates. Pain opens the mind to what peace once concealed. What was once invisible becomes visible through contrast. Without her laughter, he learns the sound of silence. Without her care, he learns the value of presence. Without her forgiveness, he learns the weight of his own actions. Loss reveals patterns that love concealed. When she was there, her presence balanced his imbalance. Her patience softened his pride. Her affection disguised his emotional distance. But when she leaves, there is nothing left to hide behind. The mirror of loss reflects his reflection back with honesty, raw, unfiltered, uncomfortable. He begins to see how his defenses were built not from strength but from fear. He begins to understand that her love was not a weakness to take advantage of, but a strength that allowed him to grow. This realization is the essence of awareness, to see clearly what one once distorted. With time, the sharpness of loss turns into clarity. He no longer blames the situation or fate. He begins to understand his own part in it. He sees how his choices, his indifference, his emotional distance contributed to what unfolded. Awareness demands responsibility. It asks him to stop seeing loss as something that happened to him and start seeing it as something that revealed him. Through that reflection, he begins to see life differently. Relationships as mirrors, emotions as guides, and love as a practice of consciousness. Every man who has loved and lost carries within him an invisible mirror. In that mirror lies the reflection of everything he could have been and everything he can still become. Loss does not take away awareness, it gives birth to it. It strips life of illusion and forces the heart to see without filters. In that space of vulnerability, where nothing remains to defend or deny, awareness blooms like light after darkness. And though he may never return to who he was before, he begins to walk through life with clearer eyes, a quieter ego, and a deeper understanding of what it truly means to see. Regret does not appear suddenly. It grows quietly in the spaces where gratitude was never spoken. It lingers in the moments we took for granted, in the words we never said, and in the gestures we failed to appreciate while they were still before us. A man often believes that love will remain, that time will offer endless chances to express what he feels. But time is silent, and love, when unacknowledged, begins to fade. When she is gone, when her voice becomes memory and her presence becomes absence, he begins to understand that regret is not about what he did wrong. It is about what he failed to cherish. Regret is the shadow that forms when gratitude is withheld. A woman's kindness often arrives in quiet ways. She cooks not out of duty but care. She listens not out of obligation but love. She gives patience when impatience would be easier, understanding when judgment would be justified. And while she offers these things, he believes they are simply part of life's rhythm. He doesn't see how much intention she carries in her silence, how much love is contained in her presence. It is only when her energy withdraws that the reality becomes clear, that every small act was a gift. The meals, the messages, the moments, all of them were threads of devotion woven into his everyday life. When they disappear, the emptiness left behind becomes the echo of unspoken gratitude. Regret begins as awareness. It whispers before it roars. It starts with a thought. I should have thanked her more. I should have noticed her effort. I should have been present. These thoughts grow stronger as silence deepens. The man starts to replay moments, not to change them, but to understand what he missed. He remembers her smile after doing something thoughtful, the way her eyes looked for acknowledgement, the pauses she took waiting for appreciation that never came. In those reflections, he realizes that gratitude is not merely polite acknowledgement. It is emotional recognition. It tells the other person, I see you. I value what you give. Without it, love begins to wither in silence. Gratitude nourishes connection. Absence of it starves it. When he fails to express gratitude, he unknowingly creates distance. She feels unseen, unappreciated, unnoticed. He doesn't realize that her withdrawal is not sudden, but accumulated over time, each unspoken thank you becoming a silent scar. By the time he awakens to her value, regret has already entered. It stands beside him like a shadow, reminding him that love's warmth cannot survive without acknowledgement. Gratitude was the sunlight that could have prevented that shadow, but he allowed clouds of pride and distraction to block it. Regret teaches in ways gratitude could have prevented. It does not speak gently, it shows truth through contrast. When he feels her absence, every act of kindness she once gave now carries double weight. A simple good morning text now feels priceless. The memory of her laughter becomes sacred. Even the moments of disagreement hold meaning because they were part of a connection that once breathed with life. Regret forces him to see what gratitude would have allowed him to cherish while it was alive. The difference between those two emotions is timing. One is awareness before loss, the other is awareness after. A man's heart often awakens when it is too late. In the stillness of separation, he begins to sense how much she gave without being asked. He remembers how she understood his moods, how she supported his silence, how she believed in his potential even when he doubted himself. Each of these memories becomes heavier because they now exist only in the past. Regret is heavy because it carries the weight of all the gratitude that was never spoken. It is not punishment, it is reflection. It shows him that the heart feels deepest when it recognizes what it has lost. The human tendency is to overlook the constant. When something or someone becomes part of our daily life, the mind labels it as permanent. But permanence is an illusion. Every presence is temporary, every connection fragile. Gratitude is the practice that honors this truth. When gratitude is missing, we begin to live unconsciously, moving through love without truly seeing it. The man realizes this only after she leaves. Her absence teaches him to see what his eyes were too familiar to notice. What was once ordinary now glows with meaning in memory. The way she said his name, the way she reminded him to eat, the way she smiled at his smallest efforts, all become treasures too late to return. Regret grows strongest in moments of quiet reflection. At night, when he lies awake, the mind begins to replay the words he never said, the apology that remained trapped behind pride, the thank you that felt unnecessary at the time, the compliments he withheld because he assumed she already knew. These are the echoes of unexpressed gratitude. They form a chorus in his memory, repeating the same truth, that love unexpressed eventually becomes sorrow remembered. Gratitude is the voice of presence, regret is the silence of absence. He begins to understand that expressing gratitude is not about grand gestures. It is about awareness in small moments. A touch, a glance, a word of recognition. These are the ways love is maintained. Gratitude transforms ordinary interactions into sacred exchanges. When he failed to express it, he unknowingly let sacred moments pass as routine. Now, in reflection, he sees that gratitude is not something to be saved for special occasions. It is the breath that keeps love alive. Without it, even deep love begins to fade under the weight of neglect. Regret teaches him about awareness, awareness of impermanence, awareness of connection, awareness of the emotional exchange that sustains relationships. Through his regret, he begins to see that every act of love deserves acknowledgement, that every person who gives deserves to be seen. Gratitude is not simply politeness, it is consciousness. It is the act of being fully present with what is, before it becomes what was. Regret arises when we realize too late that we were surrounded by gifts disguised as everyday moments. He learns that regret cannot be erased, but it can be transformed into deeper understanding. It shows him that silence was never empty. It was filled with opportunities to express love that he overlooked. Every unspoken thank you becomes a lesson in awareness. Every lost moment becomes a reminder to see, to appreciate, to speak. Regret is the shadow, but within that shadow lies light, the light of recognition, the light of emotional truth. It teaches him that love demands gratitude not as a formality, but as a form of life itself. For what is not expressed with us, and what is not seen fades quietly into memory. Possession is a quiet illusion. It disguises itself as love, but at its core, it is fear, fear of loss, fear of change, fear of uncertainty. When a man loves someone, it is natural for him to want to hold on, to keep, to claim. He believes that closeness guarantees security, that belonging means ownership. Yet the deeper truth of connection reveals itself only when he learns to release that grasp. Growth, both his and hers, does not happen within the walls of possession. It begins the moment freedom enters love. What is held too tightly cannot breathe. What is allowed to flow naturally expands. When a man feels he is losing a woman, he often experiences an awakening that shakes his foundation. Until that moment, he might have believed that love was about keeping someone near, controlling the conditions of their presence, or defining the bond by proximity. But true growth begins when he understands that love is not about possession, it is about alignment. Possession is about the self, alignment is about the soul. Possession says, "You are mine." Alignment says, "You are free, and I choose to walk beside you." To possess someone is to limit their evolution, and in doing so, to limit your own. When a man clings to what he loves, he unknowingly resists the natural process of transformation. He fears that change means loss, but change is the essence of growth. A woman is not meant to be held like an object. She is meant to be understood like a rhythm. She evolves, she shifts, she transforms, just as he does. When he realizes this, when he begins to see her not as something he owns, but as a being he honors, love begins to mature. It moves from dependence to respect, from attachment to awareness. Possession comes from insecurity. It is the ego's way of protecting itself from the pain of uncertainty. When he holds tightly, it is not always because of love. It is often because of fear, fear that without her, he will lose himself. But the paradox of love is this: only through letting go does one discover who they truly are. When she leaves, or when space grows between them, he begins to see how much of his identity was tied to her presence. He learns that love, when dependent on possession, becomes fragile. It bends under the weight of expectation. Yet, when love is grounded in respect and freedom, it grows roots that no distance can break. In the quiet after loss, a man begins to see that what he thought he owned was never his to claim. People are not possessions, they are experiences. Each connection enters our lives to teach, to mirror, to reveal something within us. When he loses her, he realizes that love cannot be preserved through control. It must be nourished through presence. The more he tried to keep her, the more he pushed her away. The moment he begins to understand this, something inside him shifts. He starts to grow. He begins to see that freedom is not the end of love, but its highest expression. When possession ends, self-reflection begins. The silence that follows her departure forces him inward. Without the comfort of her constant presence, he faces his own emptiness. This is not punishment, it is awakening. He starts to see the difference between attachment and connection. Attachment is rooted in fear. Connection is rooted in understanding. Attachment says, "I need you to make me feel whole." Connection says, "I honor you for reminding me of my wholeness." In learning this, he begins to grow beyond dependency. His awareness expands. His love transforms from clinging to appreciating. Possession keeps the mind trapped in comparison, wondering who else might take her place, what she might be doing, or how to regain control. But growth demands surrender. Surrender is not weakness, it is acceptance of what is beyond control. When he finally allows life to unfold without forcing it, he discovers peace in uncertainty. He sees that love is not meant to be managed but to be experienced. When he lets go of possession, he stops trying to contain love and begins to embody it. He stops saying, "She is mine," and starts realizing, "She was a mirror showing me parts of myself I had forgotten to see." Through letting go, he begins to understand that love's purpose is not always permanence. Sometimes it is transformation. The people we love are not ours to keep, they are ours to learn from. Each encounter serves as a reflection of our own consciousness. The moment possession ends, learning begins. He starts to recognize that what he loved in her was not something external, it was the reflection of love itself, awakening within him. Her presence activated something he already carried but had forgotten. When she left, it did not disappear, it simply called him to develop it on his own. In this space of realization, the man begins to evolve emotionally. He starts to respect boundaries, hers and his own. He learns that real love does not invade, it invites. It does not demand, it understands. It does not grip tightly in fear, but holds gently with trust. When possession dissolves, love becomes lighter. It transforms from something heavy and consuming into something expansive and liberating. The more he learns to let go, the deeper his awareness grows. He begins to understand that love cannot be taken or lost. It can only change its form. Growth after possession is not instant. It unfolds slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. At first, the absence feels unbearable. But with time, he realizes that the emptiness is not emptiness at all. It is space for expansion, space for self-awareness, space to rediscover his essence beyond her reflection. Possession once made him dependent on her energy. Growth now teaches him to generate his own. Through this process, he learns that true love is not about keeping someone close, but about respecting their evolution, even when it leads them away. He begins to see that every attempt to possess came from misunderstanding. He thought love was something to secure, to hold tightly so it wouldn't slip away. But now, he understands that love cannot be held. It can only be shared. Like water, the more one tries to grasp it, the more it escapes through the fingers. Yet when cupped with openness, it rests naturally in the palm. Growth begins when he learns to hold love this way, gently, freely, with reverence for its impermanence. Possession is the cage, awareness is the key. When the need to control fades, what remains is connection, pure, honest, unbound. Through losing what he thought he owned, he gains what he never had: understanding. Growth begins where possession ends, because love, in its purest form, was never meant to be owned. It was meant to awaken. Loss is one of life's most silent teachers. It does not announce its arrival, nor does it ask for permission. It simply comes, and when it does, it strips away all illusions of control. When a man loses someone he truly cared for, not just through separation, but through the quiet vanishing of connection, he enters a space that no amount of strength or pride can pluck him from. That space is both painful and sacred. It is the place where wisdom begins. Because wisdom does not grow in comfort, it grows in reflection. And reflection often begins where loss leaves us broken open. When everything seems certain, when love feels unshakable, the mind becomes arrogant. It believes that what is beautiful will remain simply because it exists. But when loss arrives, it removes that assumption. Suddenly, the things that seemed eternal, the warmth of her presence, the sound of her laughter, the energy of her care, all disappear like smoke in the wind. He is left standing in silence, facing not only the absence of her, but the truth of himself. In that silence, the lesson begins to unfold. Loss does not teach through explanation. It teaches through emptiness. When he feels the ache of her absence, he begins to see how much of his identity was built around her being there. She was the mirror that reflected his tenderness, the rhythm that balanced his chaos, the calm that steadied his storms. When she leaves, the mirror shatters, and he is forced to look directly into the fragments of himself. This confrontation is painful because it exposes not only his love but his dependence. He begins to see how deeply he relied on her presence to give meaning to his own. Wisdom begins when he stops resisting that pain. The instinct after loss is to escape, to distract, to numb, to move on. But avoidance only deepens the wound. It is only when he sits in the stillness of what is gone that understanding begins to take shape. He starts to realize that loss is not an end, but a revelation. It reveals what was real and what was illusion. It reveals how much he loved, how much he feared, how much he overlooked. Loss pulls the curtain back on all the truths that comfort once kept hidden. Every loss carries a lesson. Some lessons are soft, others come like storms. But the lesson beneath them all is this: nothing belongs to us forever. Every person, every moment, every feeling is temporary. To love with awareness is to love knowing this truth. To love without awareness is to love with possession, expectation, and fear. When she was there, he may have believed that love was about holding on. But now, through her absence, he begins to see that love is also about letting go. The pain he feels becomes a guide. It directs him toward humility, toward gratitude, toward understanding. In the depth of loss, his perception changes. Time slows. The details he once ignored begin to glow in memory. The way she said his name, the light in her eyes when she laughed, the silence they shared that felt like home. These fragments of memory are not meant to torment, they are meant to awaken. They remind him that life's beauty lies not in permanence, but in presence. Wisdom begins when he learns to see love not as something to possess, but as something to experience fully while it lasts. Loss dismantles the ego. It breaks the illusion that we are in control. When she leaves, he cannot demand her return, cannot undo the past, cannot rewrite what was said or unsaid. All he can do is face the reality that life moves in cycles of presence and absence. This realization humbles him. It teaches him that love, like life, is not something to master but something to honor. He begins to understand that every relationship is a teacher and every ending carries meaning. The pain becomes a form of wisdom that no book, no lecture, no philosophy could ever teach. The lesson of loss deepens over time. At first, it feels unbearable. The heart aches. The mind replays memories. The spirit feels heavy. But slowly, something within begins to shift. He starts to recognize that his pain is not just about her absence, but about his own growth. She may have left, but what she awakened in him remains. The kindness she showed, the patience she practiced, the love she offered, these qualities now live within him, guiding him toward a wiser way of being. This is the unseen gift of loss. It transforms pain into understanding. Through loss, he learns to listen differently, not to words but to silence. He learns to value what cannot be replaced, the energy behind gestures, the emotion behind presence, the sacredness of connection. He realizes that every person who enters his life brings a lesson, and every departure carries one too. Some teach him how to love. Others teach him how to let go. Both are equally necessary. The man who refuses to learn from loss repeats his pain. The man who listens to it grows from it. Wisdom is not born from perfection, it is born from impermanence. Loss shows him that nothing stays the same, not people, not emotions, not moments. Everything changes, and that change is not tragedy, it is truth. Once he understands this, his way of loving transforms. He becomes softer, more patient, more aware. He begins to love with presence rather than possession, with appreciation rather than assumption. Loss has taught him the value of impermanence, and in doing so, it has made his heart wiser. There comes a point when he no longer looks at loss as punishment. He begins to see it as part of the journey, the teacher that life sends when words no longer work. Loss humbles him. It strips away pride and awakens depth. It shows him the fragility of everything he once thought indestructible. And in that recognition, wisdom quietly enters. Wisdom is not loud, it whispers through awareness. It says, cherish while you have, release when it's time. Learn from what remains. Every man who has known love and loss carries within him two kinds of knowledge, the knowledge of joy and the knowledge of pain. But it is the second that refines the first. Joy without loss is innocence. Joy after loss is wisdom. When he understands this, he begins to live differently. He speaks more softly. He listens more deeply. He loves without needing to control. Loss has taught him that everything meaningful is fleeting, and that fleetingness is what makes it precious. Through loss, he becomes aware of the cycles of the heart, how endings make space for reflection, how reflection makes space for renewal. He begins to see that the purpose of love is not to avoid pain, but to awaken consciousness. She may be gone, but the wisdom she left behind continues to guide him, not as a wound, but as a light that lives quietly within the places that once hurt the most.